I never thought I'd come to this. Being all alone at 72 is not a good prospect, but sometimes being alone is the lesser of evils, especially when the alternative is living with the knowledge that your only family member is waiting for you to die. My name is Noah Hutton. For the past 35 years, I've run Agrotech, a small but profitable specialty farm equipment business in Logansport. The business was my brainchild, my pride, and, as it turned out, my curse. It all started in 1988 when I, along with my old friend Ray Cutler, decided to take a chance on my life savings and start my own business. We were both in our early 30s, full of energy and ambition. I was a design engineer for a large company at the time, and Ray worked in sales. We had both grown up in farming families and were well aware of the problems farmers face. Our idea was simple: to build specialized machines for small and medium-sized farms. Not the huge combines produced by the giants of the industry, but compact machines suitable for small plots with difficult terrain. The first few years were incredibly hard. Ray and I worked 17 hours a day, living on enthusiasm and stubbornness. My wife Abigail supported us in everything. She was the bookkeeper and took care of the financial part. In those days, we lived in a tiny house on the outskirts of Logansport. Our daughter Felicity was just a toddler. I remember her sitting on the floor of my makeshift workshop, playing with safe parts while I worked on prototypes. "Daddy, what's this?" she'd ask, picking up a bolt or a gear. "It's part of the future, sweetheart," I replied, not realizing how prophetic those words would prove to be. The breakthrough came in the 5th year of Agrotech's existence. We developed an innovative cultivator that could work in difficult soils with minimal fuel consumption. Orders started coming in one after another. By the end of the 90s, we employed 50 people and had an annual turnover of over $2 million. Felicity grew up with the company. As a child, she loved to come to the production, to look at the drawings, to ask questions. I was sure she would follow in my footsteps. I even sent her to a good university to study engineering. That all changed when Abigail got sick. Pancreatic cancer, a terrifying diagnosis that sounded like a thunderclap. 2 years of struggle, endless hospitals, experimental treatments. Nothing worked. Abigail was fading away and there was nothing I could do. Felicity was in her 3rd year of college at the time. She came every weekend, but I could see how hard it was for her to see her mother in her condition. Abigail passed away in the year 2000. After her death, something broke between my daughter and me. Perhaps I got too caught up in my work, trying to dull the pain. Maybe Felicity blamed me for not being able to save her mother. We drifted apart. She dropped out of engineering and switched to economics. After graduation, she worked for several companies, but never stayed long. I offered her a position at Agrotech, but she turned me down. "I don't want to be just the boss's daughter, Dad," she said. "I want to make it on my own." I respected her decision, although deep down I hoped she'd change her mind someday. The company grew, and we opened another factory in a neighboring county, expanding our product line. By the time I was 60, I could say with confidence that I had created something worthwhile. Ray was still my right hand man, now as CEO. 5 years ago, Felicity introduced me to her fiancé, Bryce. From the first time I met him, I didn't like him. There was something about the way he smiled, the way he looked at me, appraising as if estimating value. He was a financial analyst for some company in Indianapolis. He spoke beautifully, talking all the time about growth strategies and market trends, but behind all the words I had no real understanding of the business. "Noah, I admire what you've built," he said during our first meeting. "Agrotech has tremendous potential, but with the right strategy, you could double its value in a few years." "The company's not for sale," I replied then, and something flashed in his eyes. Disappointment? Irritation? I wasn't sure. After their wedding, our relationship with Felicity became even more strained. Bryce often asked questions about the company, about the finances, the management structure, the growth plans. At first, I put it down to simple curiosity, but as time went on, it became clear that he was only interested in one thing: how to get control of Agrotech. For the past 2 years, Felicity and Bryce have been hinting that I should retire. "Dad, you're 72. You deserve a vacation," my daughter said. "Bryce and I could take over." "I'm not old enough to be written off," I joked, but each time they insinuated it, it got more and more insistent. And I, Uh, I just couldn't imagine my life without Agrotech. It wasn't just a company, it was an extension of myself, my legacy. The first signs of health problems came last fall. Sudden dizziness, short-term loss of coordination. The doctor insisted on a checkup, but I always had more important things to do. Ray was worried too. "Noah, you can't ignore this forever," he said. "The company's not going anywhere if you take a week off." "It's all nonsense. It's just age." I waved it off. That day in mid-April started as usual. I arrived at the office by 7 in the morning, went through the mail, and had a morning meeting with the department heads. An important meeting was scheduled for 10:30 with a group of investors from Chicago. They were interested in our new line of organic farming equipment, and I expected to sign a contract. An hour before the meeting, a migraine started. Not just a headache, but something much worse. It was like someone was hammering nails into my skull. I took a pill and tried to focus on the presentation. The investors arrived right on time. 3 men in expensive suits with cold, appraising stares. Ray escorted them to the conference room where I was already waiting. The meeting started well. I talked about the new technology, showed sales charts, answered questions, but with each passing minute, it became more and more difficult to formulate my thoughts. Dark spots began to appear in front of my eyes, and the right side of my body felt strangely numb. "Gentlemen, our new model of cultivator reduces, I stammered, unable to remember a simple word. Reduces the cost of," and then the room spun. I tried to grab onto the table, but my arm wouldn't budge. The last thing I remember was Ray's worried face and his voice yelling for someone to call an ambulance. I woke up in the hospital. The bright light was cutting into my eyes and my head was splitting with pain. I tried to move and realized that the right side of my body was almost unresponsive to brain commands. There was a nurse sitting next to me who noticed that I had regained consciousness and immediately called the doctor. "Mr. Hutton, you've had an ischemic stroke," said a gray-haired man in a white coat. "You're lucky to have gotten help so quickly, but you have a long road to recovery." Stroke. At 72, that sounded like a judgment. I tried to say something, but I couldn't speak, and all I could get out of my mouth was mumbling. Panic gripped me. How am I going to run the company if I can't even speak? Ray entered the room, his face a mixture of relief and worry. "Noah, thank God you're awake. We were all so worried." He took a seat next to the bed and squeezed my left hand tightly. "Don't worry about the company. I'll take care of everything until you get better. All you need to think about right now is recovery." I tried to smile, but all I got was a wry grimace. Ray always understood me right off the bat. "Does Felicity know?" I could barely squeeze out. "Yeah, I called her right away. She and Bryce should be arriving from Indianapolis by tonight." Somehow that news didn't bring relief. On the contrary, there was a vague unease somewhere deep inside. I closed my eyes, feeling the fatigue come in waves. My last thought before falling asleep was about the company. What would become of Agrotech if I couldn't return? The next few days passed like a blur. Constant checkups, tests, first sessions with a speech therapist and physical therapist. My speech gradually returned, although I still stuttered and mixed up words. My right arm was almost immobile, but there was some sensitivity in my leg. Felicity arrived the day after the stroke. She looked worried, but I noticed something else in her eyes. Some kind of determination, like she'd already made an important decision. "Daddy, how are you?" she asked, hugging me gently. "You scared us so much." "I've been better," I said with difficulty. "Where's Bryce?" "He's parking the car. He'll be right there." She looked around as if to see if anyone was listening, then leaned closer. "Dad, we need to talk about the company. In your condition, you can't run it. I think it's time for me and Bryce to take over, at least temporarily until you get better. There's something inside of me that's been squeezed. Not how can I help, or what should I tell Ray, but hand over control to us." I looked at my daughter, trying to see her as the little girl who once sat in my workshop. But in front of me was a strange woman with a cold, calculating gaze. "Ray can handle it," I said, feeling the headache growing. "Ray's not family, Dad. The company has to stay in the family." Bryce walked into the room at that moment. When he saw me, he made a sympathetic grimace, but his eyes remained cold. Noah, how are you feeling? He asked, shaking my left hand. It's awful to see you like this. I'll get over it, I answered briefly. I've already told Daddy that we need to talk about running the company, Felicity said. Bryce nodded, his face serious. Noah, all you need to think about is rebuilding. Let us take care of everything. I have experience with finances. I can keep the company afloat. Keep it afloat? I mentally resented. Agrotech has never been on the verge of bankruptcy. On the contrary, we've shown steady growth over the last few years. I already said, Ray can handle it, I repeated, feeling my anger rising. Ray is a wonderful man, Bryce smiled. But he's old, fashioned. Agrotech needs a fresh set of eyes, new approaches. I looked at my daughter, then at my son-in-law. Something in their eyes and the way they looked at each other made me deeply uneasy. They'd obviously already made up their minds amongst themselves. I need rest, I said, closing my eyes. I'll talk to you later. Sure, Dad, Felicity replied, but I could hear the disappointment in her voice. We'll come back tomorrow. In the meantime, get some rest. When they left, I lay with my eyes closed for a long time, replaying the conversation in my head. 35 years building a company, 35 years of putting my heart and soul into it. And now that I was confined to a hospital bed, my own daughter and son-in-law were trying to take it away from me. I didn't sleep much that night, tormented by anxious thoughts and a headache. In the morning, Ray came in. He brought fruit and news from the office. The investors haven't backed out of the deal, he reported. I've had a second meeting with them. They're willing to wait for you to get better. Thank you, I thanked him sincerely. What else is going on? Ray was silent for a moment, as if searching for words. Felicity and Bryce came by the office yesterday. They asked to see the financial statements, the contracts, the management structure. Said you'd put them in charge temporarily. Ray and I were friends for over 40 years. He knew me better than anyone, including my own daughter. And now he was looking at me with a mute question in his eyes. I didn't tell them to do anything, I answered. They suggested it. Ray nodded, as if he'd gotten confirmation of his suspicions. That's what I thought. That's why I said I couldn't give them access to important documents without a written order from you. You did the right thing. They weren't happy, especially Bryce. He hinted that at my age it was time to think about retirement. We both chuckled. Ray was 68, a little less than I was. Be careful with them, I warned. They're up to something, plotting. Don't worry, I'll keep an eye on the company, Ray assured me. And you concentrate on getting better. After Ray left, I tried to force myself to do the exercises the physical therapist had prescribed. I needed to regain mobility on the right side of my body as quickly as possible. I felt like I didn't have much time. Something told me that Felicity and Bryce wouldn't wait for my full recovery. They returned in the evening with ostentatious concern and fake smiles, but I was already prepared for their arrival. In my years of running a company, I'd learned to read people, to see their true intentions behind a mask of politeness. Dad, how are you feeling? Felicity asked, sitting down on the edge of my bed. Better, I answered, deliberately shortening my sentences to hide my speech problems. We talked to your doctor, Bryce said, standing by the window. He thinks it'll take a few months to recover, maybe even a year. I stayed silent, waiting to see where they were going with this. Dad, Felicity took my hand. Bryce and I are seriously concerned. Agrotech can't go this long without leadership. Ray is certainly experienced, but he lacks strategic vision. We think the best solution is for you to sign a power of attorney in our name, Bryce added, temporarily until you get better. We'll keep the company for you. Their concern for the company would have been touching if I hadn't seen the greedy glint in Bryce's eyes and the determined crease between Felicity's eyebrows. They clearly weren't going to give me back control when I recovered, if I recovered at all. I'll think about it, I replied briefly. Dad, there's nothing to think about, Felicity insisted. It's the best decision for everyone. You need to focus on your health, not worry about business. I closed my eyes, pretending to be tired. Tomorrow, we'll talk. They didn't insist, but I could sense their disappointment. They had expected to get my consent today. After they left, I lay staring at the ceiling and thought about how strangely life had turned out. My own daughter, my only family member, had planned to rob me of my life's work. using my illness to take over what I had spent decades creating. That night I made a decision. I wasn't going down without a fight. Agrotech was my baby, my legacy, and I would not let anyone, not even my own daughter, take it away from me. I'd been in the hospital for a week now, and each day seemed harder than the last. The hospital smells, the noise in the hallway, the cramped quarters. It was more mentally taxing than I could have imagined. But worst of all was the helplessness. The stroke had stolen from me not only my health, but also the independence I had clung to all these years. In the mornings, a young physical therapist, Tasha Pellegrini, an Italian woman with stiff hands and infinite patience, would come in. She made me do exercises that seemed pointless and humiliating. Flexing my fingers, lifting my arm, trying to hold a rubber ball in the palm of my hand. Things that used to happen automatically now required tremendous effort. "You're making progress, Mr. Hutton," Tasha said, though I could see in her eyes that the progress was minimal. Things were going a little better with the speech therapist. My speech was gradually becoming more coherent, though I still stuttered and sometimes couldn't remember the right word. This was especially humiliating for someone used to speaking in front of investors and leading meetings. Felicity and Bryce showed up every day, usually in the evening. They brought fruit, magazines I didn't read, and news I didn't want to hear. With each visit, I noticed more and more clearly that their supposed concern was just a cover. On my third day in the hospital, Bryce brought in a pile of papers. "Just formalities, Noah," he said with that smug smile that always got on my nerves. "So we can pay the company's bills and sign contracts while you recover." I took the papers in my left hand and flipped through them slowly. A power of attorney authorizing Bryce and Felicity to sign documents on behalf of the company. Too broad an authorization for mere formalities. "I need time," I said, putting the papers aside. "I'll talk to a lawyer." Bryce's face tensed, but he quickly pulled himself together. "Of course, Noah, but time is short. The contract with Midwest Agro expires tomorrow, and Ray refuses to sign it without your authorization." I looked at my son-in-law and thought about how I'd never heard of the Midwest Agro contract. It was either a new deal I didn't know about yet or another lie. "I'll ask Ray," I said. "You don't have to worry about work," Felicity interjected. "The doctors say that stress will slow your recovery." "It's my business," I said stubbornly. "I need to know." Felicity and Bryce exchanged quick glances. There was irritation and impatience in that silent dialogue. They were obviously counting on my condition to make me more cooperative. After they left, I called Ray. Despite the late hour, he answered immediately, as if he'd been expecting my call. "What's the contract with Midwest Agro?" I asked without preamble. "There is no Midwest Agro contract," Ray answered after a short pause. "At least, I don't know anything about it. What's going on, Noah?" I told him about Felicity and Bryce's visit, about the papers they were trying to get me to sign. "Be careful," Ray warned. "I sense they're up to something." Bryce came to the accounting department today, demanding access to the financial statements. Carol refused him, saying that she couldn't give him that information without your direct order. Carol Bennett has been our chief accountant for 15 years, a dedicated employee and a consummate professional. "How did he react?" I asked. "Angry, but he tried to hide it. He said that things would change soon, and she would regret her decision." It sounded like a threat. My mind immediately conjured up disturbing images. What if Bryce and Felicity decided to go even further? What if they tried to remove me from the company altogether? "Ray," I said slowly, "do we have a plan B?" Ray understood without further explanation. 2 years ago, when I'd first noticed Bryce's interest in the structure of the company, we developed several defense strategies in case of a hostile takeover attempt. One of them included a controlled bankruptcy procedure that temporarily froze all assets and blocked any attempt to change management. "It's all set," Ray replied. "But let's not be too hasty. They're just probing the ground for now." "Stay alert," I asked, "and keep the documents safe." The next day, Felicity came alone. She looked worried, which was atypical of her usually collected image. "Dad, how are you feeling?" she asked, sitting down on the edge of my bed. "Better," I answered briefly, not wanting to go into details. She was silent for a moment, rubbing the strap of her watch, a gesture I remembered from her childhood. Felicity always did that when she was nervous or about to say something unpleasant. "Dad, I wanted to talk about yesterday," she began. Bryce and I are worried about you and the future of the company. We don't want you to think we're trying to take anything away from you. I looked at my daughter and tried to see her as the little girl I'd taught to ride a bike. But in front of me sat a strange woman with a cold, calculating gaze. Then what was the purpose, this power of attorney? I asked. It's just for convenience while you recover. Ray can't handle everything, and some decisions have to be made quickly. Ray can handle it, I countered. 35 years. He has. Felicity sighed, a look of irritation on her face that she tried to hide. Dad, the world is changing. Business is changing. Ray is a wonderful man, but his methods are outdated. Bryce knows how to increase the value of the company, how to take it to the next level. Why? I asked him directly. Agrotech is profitable, stable, but it could be worth so much more. We could expand, go international, maybe even have an IPO. I shook my head. Ray and I had never intended to turn Agrotech into a global corporation. We like to keep the company compact enough to know every employee by name. We took pride in the quality of our products and our relationships with our customers, many of whom had worked with us for decades. That's not what I want, I said firmly. What do you want, Dad? You want the company to stay a small regional firm? That everything you've spent years building doesn't reach its potential? There was genuine incomprehension in her voice. She really couldn't understand why I was turning down the opportunity to increase the value of the company. That was the problem. Felicity and Bryce only looked at Agrotech as an asset to be sold for more money. They didn't see the people, the families whose lives depended on the stability of this business. I want this company to stay true to its principles, I replied. Felicity stood up, her patience clearly wearing thin. Okay, Dad, I see we have nothing to talk about today. Get some rest. We'll come back tomorrow. She left without saying goodbye, and I realized that there was a chasm growing between us that might not be bridged. That night I couldn't sleep for a long time, thinking about my conversation with my daughter. Something in her words kept me awake. She talked about expansion, about IPOS, as if she already had a plan ready. But most disturbing of all, she never once mentioned me returning to the helm of the company. It was like she'd already written me off. In the morning, I was awakened by the phone ringing. It was Ray, and I could tell from his voice that something serious had happened. Noah, are you sitting up? He asked, even though he knew I was in a hospital bed. What happened? Felicity and Bryce were at the bank, trying to access corporate accounts. Said they had power of attorney from you. I got cold feet. They don't have, power of attorney? I know they don't. The bank called me to confirm, and I explained the situation. But Noah, they won't stop there. What do you suggest? Come to the office as soon as the doctors say it's okay. We need to take action before it's too late. After talking to Ray, I immediately contacted the attending physician. Dr. Sykes was adamantly opposed to my discharge. Mr. Hutton, you've suffered a massive stroke. You need observation and regular therapy. Returning to work now could seriously jeopardize your health. Doctor, I said, trying to speak clearly, if I stay here, I won't have anything to worry about. I won't have a company to go back to. The doctor looked at me with sympathy and incomprehension. To him, this was just another stubborn patient who didn't realize the seriousness of his condition. I can't hold you by force, he finally said. But I strongly recommend that you stay in the hospital for at least another week. And if you do decide to leave, you'll need outpatient observation and continued therapy. I agreed to a compromise, 3 more days in the hospital, then discharge on my own recognizance. Dr. Sykes wasn't happy, but he knew I couldn't do any better. In the evening, Felicity and Bryce came in again. This time they looked tense, even angry. I guess the visit to the bank hadn't gone as they'd planned. How are you feeling, Dad? Felicity asked, but there was no genuine interest in her voice. Better, I replied. I'll be discharged in 3 days. The news clearly took them by surprise. What? But that's too soon, Felicity exclaimed. The doctor said you need constant care. I hired a nurse, I lied. I wasn't really going to hire anyone, but they don't need to know that. That's crazy, Noah, Bryce interjected. In your condition, you should be under medical supervision. My decision is final, I cut him off. Felicity and Bryce exchanged glances again. I could almost physically feel their disappointment and anxiety. The plan, whatever it was, wasn't working if I went back to the office. If you insist, Felicity finally said, we'll help you get settled at home. But going back to the office is out of the question. You need peace. I'll manage, I said stubbornly. Dad, be reasonable. You can barely talk, let alone run a company. Ray will help. Bryce's face contorted with barely contained anger. Ray, it's always Ray. He's just an employee, Noah. He cares about his position, not the future of the company. I stared at my son-in-law, trying to see if he really believed what he was saying. Ray wasn't just an employee. He was the co-founder of Agrotech, my friend and partner for decades. Ray is my friend, I said slowly, and co-owner of the company. With a minority stake, Bryce parried. You're the controlling shareholder, and your decisions determine the future of Agrotech. Exactly, I agreed. My decisions. The atmosphere in the room grew tense. I could see Felicity fidgeting with her watch band and Bryce barely restraining himself from saying something harsh. Dad, Felicity finally said, trying to sound reasonable, we only want what's best for you and the company. You need time to recover. Let us help you. I appreciate your concern, I replied, not hiding the irony. But Agrotech is my responsibility. Bryce couldn't take it anymore and stood up. Come on, Felicity. Apparently your father isn't in the mood for intelligent conversation today. They left, leaving me with mixed feelings. On the one hand, I was glad I'd finally made my point. On the other, I realized that this conversation had only strengthened their resolve to go behind my back. The next day, Ray came in. He looked tired and worried, but his face brightened at the sight of me. You look better, he remarked. Your speech has improved too. I'm trying, I replied. What's new in the office? Ray sat down in the chair next to the bed and lowered his voice, as if he feared we were being overheard. The situation is escalating. After the bank debacle, Bryce contacted our lawyer, Tim Fitzgerald. He was trying to find out if there were ways to suspend you from running the company for health reasons. Tim had been Agrotech's in-house counsel for over 20 years. I had complete confidence in his professionalism and integrity. And what did Tim say? That it was impossible without a court order, and that he would protect your interests by all legal means? I nodded. It's good to have loyal people at times like this. What else? Bryce started talking to the employees behind your back, especially with the younger, newer ones, telling them about the bright future of the company under his leadership, promises them raises, bonuses. Creates a support group, I said. It was a smart move, I had to admit. It was, and some people fall for it, especially those who don't know you personally. And Felicity, Ray paused, searching for words. She acts as a go-between, telling people she's worried about your health, that you don't realize how much you need rest. A lot of people believe her. She is your daughter, after all. That was the most painful part. I thought Felicity had just fallen under Bryce's influence, but it seems she was a full-fledged part of the conspiracy. Anything else I should know? Ray ran his hand nervously through his hair, a gesture I'd rarely seen him do. I overheard them talking in the hallway yesterday. They didn't know I was around. Bryce said, Ray stammered, as if hesitant to repeat what my brother-in-law had said. Go ahead, I encouraged him. He said, don't worry, at his age and diagnosis, he won't last long. And if he does, you can always convince the court that he's incapacitated. I felt a cold rage fill me. It was one thing to try to seize control of the company, and quite another to want me dead. And Felicity? What was her response? Ray averted his eyes. She said, don't say that. He is my father after all. But you know, there was no real objection in her voice, more like concern that someone might hear. I closed my eyes, feeling the pain of my daughter's betrayal, overshadowing even the physical pain. I had lost her. In fact, I'd probably lost her a long time ago. I just didn't want to admit it. We have to act, I said, opening my eyes. We can't wait for them to make their next move. Ray nodded, a look of determination in his eyes. What do you suggest? Plan B, I answered briefly. Start the preparations. I'll check out in 2 days and come straight to the office. We'll start the process then. Are you sure? It's a last resort. Do we have a choice? They're not going to stop, Ray. They've decided to take my company away from me, and they're going to go all the way. Ray rubbed his chin thoughtfully. You're right. I'll start preparations. But be careful. If Felicity and Bryce suspect something, they might act even more forcefully. After Ray left, I lay staring at the ceiling and pondered the situation. All my life I'd built a business, hoping to one day pass it on to my daughter. Now I had to protect the company from her and her husband. Ironic? No, more like a pattern. I was so consumed with building and growing Agrotech, I didn't realize I was estranged from my only child. And when Abigail was gone, there was a rift between us that we never bridged. I spent the next 2 days preparing for discharge. I worked diligently with a physical therapist to try to regain mobility in my right arm. I worked with a speech therapist, practicing my speech. I needed to look as healthy and competent as possible when I returned to the office. Felicity and Bryce came in daily, but our conversations became increasingly tense and short. They could see that I wouldn't give in, and their contrived concern was gradually replaced by barely concealed irritation. On the day of my discharge, they didn't show up. Instead, they sent word that they were busy preparing the house for my return. I didn't believe that excuse for a second. They must have been planning their next move. Ray came to pick me up in his old Ford. He helped me into the car and loaded my few belongings into the trunk. Ready? He asked, starting the engine. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, looking at the hospital that had become my prison for 2 weeks. On the way, Ray told me about the latest developments in the company. Bryce had become even more active, holding informal meetings with department heads, hinting at changes to come. Felicity was gathering information about the financial condition of the company, using her connections with some of the accounting staff. They're preparing for something serious, Ray concluded, perhaps a direct confrontation when you return. Let them, I replied calmly. I'm ready. Ray gave me a quick glance. You look determined. I am. They've declared war, Ray, and I'm not going to lose it. We pulled up to the Agrotech office, a modern 2-story glass and concrete building on the outskirts of Logansport. I insisted that Ray bring me here first, not home. I needed to assess the situation in person. When we entered the lobby, the employees greeted me with surprised looks. Many approached, expressing their joy at my return, inquiring about my health. I tried to speak clearly and confidently, showing that I was still on the job, despite the consequences of the stroke. Nothing had changed in my office. The same folders on the shelves, the same pictures on the walls. I lowered myself into the chair with difficulty, feeling both tired and strangely pleased to be back. Call the department heads, I asked Ray. We need to have an emergency meeting. Right now, Ray looked worried. You just got out of the hospital. Why don't you get some rest first? There's no time, I cut him off. They won't wait, and we can't either. Ray nodded and walked out. And I was alone in my office, preparing for the battle that would decide the fate of my life's work. The meeting with the department heads was tense. I could see the worry on their faces, mixed with relief at my return. Each of them had worked at Agrotech for at least 10 years. For many, the company was a second family. Thank you for coming on such short notice, I began, trying to speak clearly without stuttering. As you can see, I'm back, though not yet fully recovered. Janet Price, the head of the development department, was the first to break the awkward silence. We're all glad you're back, Noah. It's been strange. I noticed several people exchanging meaningful glances. They obviously knew more than they were saying. What happened in my absence? I asked directly. Speak openly. There will be no repercussions. Silence again. Then Paul Fisher, the production manager, coughed. Mr. Eldridge spent a lot of time in the office, talking to employees, asking questions about work processes, reviewing documents. He introduced himself as your son-in-law and advisor, added Carol Bennett, chief accountant. Demanded access to financial records. When I refused without your direct order, he became insistent. Insistent? I asked him again. He implied that he would soon be making decisions about who would stay with the company and who wouldn't, Carol said quietly. I looked at the others. No one seemed surprised by the information, so Bryce wasn't hiding his intentions. And my daughter? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Miss Felicity was more diplomatic, replied David Horn, the sales manager. She talked about the company's growth prospects, about new opportunities. about how important it was for you to regain your health without worrying about the day-to-day. I nodded. Typical tactic. Bryce playing the role of the bad cop and Felicity playing the good cop. An old trick, but often effective. I appreciate your candor, I said. And I want to be clear. I remain the head of Agrotech. My health is gradually improving, and I am in full control of my mental faculties. I could see the relief on their faces. So they still trusted me, despite Bryce's attempts to sow doubt. In the next few days, Ray and I will audit everything that's happened in my absence. If you notice anything out of the ordinary, report it immediately. It's critical to the future of the company. After the meeting, I asked Ray to stay late. When everyone left, he sank heavily into the chair across from me. It's worse than I thought, he admitted. Bryce was acting very aggressively, trying to establish his authority. What about the legal documents? I asked. Had there been any attempts to make changes? Ray shook his head. Tim Fitzgerald was holding up his defenses. Without your signature or a court order, no one could change the articles of incorporation. That was a small relief. At least legally, I still owned the company. And unofficially, Bryce had made contact with several employees, especially the new ones who didn't work with you directly, trying to form a support group. How's that going? Mixed. A lot of people don't trust him, especially the old-timers, but he can be persuasive when he wants to be. I rubbed my temples, feeling the headache coming back. The doctors had warned me that stress could trigger complications, but I had no choice. We need to get ahead of them, Ray. They're probably planning something big. I agree, but what is it? I don't know, but I'm sure we'll find out soon enough. I wasn't wrong. The next morning, as soon as I arrived at the office, the secretary informed me that Tim Fitzgerald was expecting me. Our corporate lawyer looked worried, which was unusual for his normally unflappable nature. Noah, good to see you on your feet, he said, shaking my hand. What's wrong, Tim? Fitzgerald put a folder of documents on the table. I got a notice from the court yesterday. Your daughter and her husband filed a petition to declare you incapacitated and to appoint temporary guardians to administer your estate, including a controlling interest in Agrotech. I felt the blood rush to my face. I had expected something like this, but the reality was still painful. On what grounds? Medical, they claim that after a stroke, you're incapable of making adequate decisions and running a business. Do they have proof? They provided a report from a Dr. Matthews, a neurologist. He says that based on the symptoms Felicity described to him, your condition requires constant monitoring and precludes you from running the company. He hasn't even examined me. I was outraged. Exactly. It's a conclusion that doesn't stand up to scrutiny, but they're counting on the surprise factor and your weakened condition. I leaned back in my chair, trying to calm down. Anger was not a good counselor right now. What do you recommend, Tim? 1, we need a statement from your doctor that you're competent to stand trial. 2, we need to prepare for trial. They've requested an emergency review, and the hearing's set for next week. That fast? They claim that every day you're in charge creates risks for the company. I shook my head. They'd acted brazenly but calculatedly. If I was still in the hospital, they'd have a chance to catch me off guard. All right, Tim, get all the necessary paperwork ready and contact Dr. Sykes, my attending physician. He should be able to give you an objective opinion. After the lawyer left, I called Ray and summarized the situation. You don't look surprised, I remarked. I expected something like this, Ray replied. They realize you won't give in willingly, and given your health, it's the most obvious move. Tim thinks their evidence base is weak. Maybe, but the trial could take a long time. In the meantime, they'll continue to undermine your credibility with the company. I've been thinking. Ray was right. Even if we won the trial, the process could take months. During that time, Agrotech would be in limbo, which would inevitably affect business. We need to activate Plan B, I decided. But first, I want to talk to Felicity and Bryce in person, to look them in the eye. Ray looked worried. Are you sure? In your condition? I'm completely sane, Ray, and I want them to know that. I called my daughter and invited her and Bryce to lunch at a restaurant near the office. To my surprise, she accepted without hesitation. Lorenzo's was my and Abigail's favorite place. It was small, cozy, and had great Italian food. I'd chosen a table in the corner where I could talk without fear of being overheard. Felicity and Bryce showed up right on time. My daughter looked tense but determined. Bryce, as usual, radiated self-assurance. "Glad you could make it," I said as they sat down at the table. "Sure, Dad," Felicity replied with a strained smile. "How are you feeling?" "Better every day. The doctors say I'm recovering faster than they expected." "That's wonderful," Bryce said without much enthusiasm. "But you shouldn't be in any hurry to get back to work." "That's what I wanted to talk about," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "Tim Fitzgerald told me about your appeal to the court." Felicity flinched and Bryce tensed. They clearly didn't expect me to find out so soon. "Dad, don't take this the wrong way," Felicity began. "We're worried about you and the company." "Are you?" I didn't hide my skepticism. "So concerned that you're willing to declare me incompetent without a single medical examination?" "Dr. Matthews is a respected specialist," Bryce countered. "He studied your medical history and symptoms." "He's never seen me," I countered. "And how would he have access to my medical history? It's privileged information." Bryce and Felicity exchanged quick glances. "We described your condition to him," my daughter said uncertainly. "He said it was enough for a pretrial detention." "A preliminary report that's enough to try to take my company away from me?" "No one is trying to take anything away," Felicity exclaimed. "We want to help." "Help yourself," I clarified. "Not me or the company." Bryce coughed. "Noah, let's be honest. Agrotech is a valuable asset that needs stable management. In your condition, you can't provide that stability." "I've been running the company for 35 years, I said slowly. "Even after my stroke, I understand this business better than you ever will." On the way to the office, I couldn't shake the heavy thoughts. The conversation only confirmed my worst fears. They won't back down. What's more, they are completely convinced that they are right. When I returned, I found the office buzzing like a beehive. News of the lawsuit had somehow leaked out, and now everyone was discussing the possible ramifications. Some employees looked alarmed, others outraged. It was clear that the company was divided between those who supported me and those who thought Felicity and Bryce were acting in good faith. Ray was waiting for me in the office, looking through some papers. "What's up?" he asked when I closed the door. "Just as I thought. They think they're doing the right thing. Or at least they want to believe it." I briefly recounted to him the conversation at the restaurant. Ray listened without interrupting, only occasionally shaking his head. "They don't realize they're going to destroy the company with their new approaches," I concluded. "Or they don't care," Ray pointed out. "Bryce is only interested in the financial side, not the people." I sat back in my chair, feeling the fatigue coming in waves. The stroke was still taking its toll, and the stress of the last few days wasn't helping my recovery. "What's new?" I asked, nodding at the papers Ray was looking through. "Tim sent a preliminary analysis of the situation. In his opinion, we have a good chance of winning the case, but the process may take longer. And while the court makes its decision, Felicity and Bryce could do irreparable damage to the company's reputation. That's what I'm afraid of." At that moment, there was a knock on the door. It was my secretary, Linda. "Mr. Hutton, Mr. Fisher's here to see you. He says it's urgent." Paul Fisher, the production manager, looked worried. "What's wrong, Paul?" I asked him when he came in. Mr. Eldridge had just been in production, inspecting the equipment, talking to the workers, said he was planning streamlining and modernization. I looked over at Ray. Bryce clearly wasn't wasting any time. What exactly was he saying? That some of the equipment was obsolete and needed to be replaced, that some of the processes could be automated by reducing staff, that the company was about to go to the next level. And the workers? How did they react? Paul shrugged his shoulders. It varied. The young ones were mostly interested. He promised wage increases to those who would support the changes. The old-timers were skeptical, but many are concerned. There are rumors of massive layoffs. "Thank you, Paul. Keep me posted if you hear anything else." With Fisher gone, I turned to Ray. "They're acting too brazen. It's like they're already sure they're going to win." "Maybe they have some trump cards we don't know about," Ray suggested. I wondered, what could give them such confidence? A bribed judge, fake medical reports, or just Bryce's arrogance? Either way, we have to be prepared for the worst, I decided. Start preparing for Plan B, contact Tim, and have him prepare all the necessary paperwork. Ray nodded and left the office. I was alone thinking about how quickly things had changed. A month ago, I was a healthy, energetic man, confidently running the company. Now I was struggling to maintain control of my life's work, and my own daughter had become an adversary in that struggle. I spent the rest of the day meeting with key employees, trying to reassure them that the company would not change course. Most expressed support, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. The stroke had left visible marks. My speech was still not perfect. My right arm was not functioning well. I understood their fears. They were afraid for their jobs, for the future of the company. By evening, I felt completely exhausted. My headache had gotten worse, and even my thoughts were getting jumbled. Ray insisted I go home and rest. "Tomorrow's a big day," he reminded me. "You need your strength." At home, I discovered that Felicity and Bryce had been there in my absence. They'd taken some documents from my home office. Old financial statements, copies of contracts, drafts of the company's development plans. It was already a real intrusion, and it made me even angrier. When I arrived at the office in the morning, a new nuisance awaited me. Bryce had called an informal meeting of department heads to present his growth plan for the company, a plan that included downsizing, moving some production overseas, and making cheaper models. He spoke as if he had already made up his mind, David Horn told me, as if everything had been decided and we just had to accept it. And the others, how did they react? It varied. Some liked the idea, especially the young managers to whom he promised promotions. Others were skeptical, but afraid to openly object. Bryce hinted that those who didn't support the changes might not fit into the new company structure. I could feel the anger building up inside. Bryce was acting as if he already had control of Agrotech. It wasn't just arrogance anymore. It was an open power grab. At noon, Tim Fitzgerald called. "Noah, I have some bad news. Judge Kramer, who will be hearing your case, is known for his conservative views. He often sides with the family in disputes like this. So we don't stand a chance?" "Not necessarily. We have a strong legal position. But we have to be prepared for the possibility that the process could drag on, and Kramer could appoint a temporary receiver during the trial." "And who do you think he'll appoint?" "Well, in cases like this, it's usually a close relative. I mean, most likely Felicity. That was the worst-case scenario. If Felicity got control, even temporarily, she'd probably let Bryce start his development plan, and that meant destroying everything I'd spent decades building." "Thanks, Tim. Keep me posted." I hung up the phone and called Ray. "How are the preparations going?" I asked him when he came in. "It's done. The paperwork for the supervised bankruptcy is done. As soon as you give the go-ahead, we can start the process." "That's good. But let's wait a little longer. I want to make sure we really have no other option." Ray nodded, but I could see he didn't share my caution. "Noah, they're not going to stop. Bryce requested access to our client database this morning. Says he wants to do some market research." "And you gave him access?" "Of course not. But he got persistent. Said if I continued to sabotage progress, I'd be in trouble when he took control of the company. It was already an open conflict. Bryce clearly felt confident enough to threaten the CEO of the company." "I think we should take a walk around the office," I suggested. "I want to see for myself what's going on." Ray and I left the office and headed toward the sales department. On the way, I noticed that the employees were looking at us with concern and confusion. The atmosphere in the company had clearly changed. As we passed the small meeting room, I heard voices. The door was ajar, and I instinctively slowed my step. It was Felicity and Bryce. They didn't see us, completely absorbed in the conversation. "Are you sure the judge will be on our side?" Felicity asked. "Absolutely," Bryce answered smugly. "Judge Kramer is an old friend of my father's. He's already made it clear that he'll support our position." I froze, not believing my ears. They were using personal connections to influence the judge. It wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. What if Dad does prove he's competent? I could hear the doubt in Felicity's voice. "Don't worry about it. Even if he wins in court, by then we'll have reorganized the company according to our plan. And when I finally get control, Agrotech will be worth twice as much." "And we'll be able to sell it?" Felicity asked. "Of course. I'm already in preliminary talks with Omega Corp. They're interested in buying it if we cut costs and increase profitability." "Father will be furious," Felicity said quietly. He always said that he would never sell Agrotech to corporations. Oh, why? Who cares what he thinks? Bryce laughed. He doesn't have long left anyway. And when I get control, this company will finally be mine. I'll be able to do whatever I want with it. It took my breath away. They weren't just trying to remove me. They were planning to completely destroy what I'd spent a lifetime building. Sell the company to a corporation that would probably shut down production in Logansport, lay off most of the employees, and move everything overseas. I took a step back, signaling Ray to back off as well. We quietly walked back down the hallway and then into my office. "Did you hear that?" I asked as the door closed behind us. "Every word," Ray answered grimly. "They don't just want control, they want to sell the company." Omega Corp, I shook my head. The same corporation that shut down 3 factories in the county in the last 5 years. Thousands of people lost their jobs. Exactly. They buy companies, squeeze everything they can out of them, and then shut down production, moving it to countries with cheap labor. I pulled out my phone and dialed Ray's number, even though he was standing next to me. It was necessary for the official record of the conversation. "Ray," I said into the phone, "start the bankruptcy process. Immediately." "Are you sure?" he asked, looking me in the eye. "Absolutely," I answered and disconnected the phone. Nash said they left us no choice. After I had ordered the bankruptcy process to begin, events began to unfold at breakneck speed. Ray immediately contacted Tim Fitzgerald, and together they began preparing the necessary paperwork. Plan B, the plan we had developed 2 years ago, was finally in motion. The essence of the plan was simple. Initiate a controlled bankruptcy proceeding that temporarily froze all of the company's assets and blocked any attempt to change the ownership structure or management. This gave us time to reorganize the company in a way that would protect it from a hostile takeover. In this case, by my own daughter and her husband. How soon would they find out? I asked Ray when he returned to my office after talking to the lawyer. "Very soon," he replied. "Tim has already filed an application with the court. As soon as the judge approves the start of the procedure, all of the company's bank accounts will be frozen and all transactions will be suspended until the court decides on the restructuring." "And the chances that the judge will approve?" "High. The procedure is standard, and we have every reason. The company is facing the threat of a hostile takeover that could lead to its liquidation." I nodded. Now all we had to do was wait. I realized that Felicity and Bryce would be furious when they learned of my move. But I didn't care about that. After what I'd heard in the meeting room, all doubt vanished. They weren't just trying to remove me from management. They were planning to sell the company to a corporation known for its ruthless approach to absorb businesses. Not an hour later, a furious Bryce literally flew into the office. His usually impeccable appearance was broken. His tie was off to the side, his face flushed with anger. "What have you done?" he shouted, ignoring Ray's presence. "Are you out of your mind? Bankruptcy?" I looked at him calmly. "Yes, Bryce, controlled bankruptcy, a perfectly legal procedure to protect a company from a hostile takeover." "What hostile takeover? We're your family, damn it." "The family that's planning to sell Omega Corp," I countered. "I heard everything, Bryce. Your conversation with Felicity in the conference room." He turned pale but quickly pulled himself together. "You misunderstood. We were just discussing theoretical possibilities." "This company will finally be mine," I quoted. "That's a pretty unambiguous phrase, don't you think?" Bryce clenched his fists, as if restraining himself from a physical attack. "You don't know what you're doing. Bankruptcy would destroy the company." "No," I objected calmly. "A controlled bankruptcy will protect it from people like you." At that moment, Felicity ran into the office. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying. "Dad, what's going on? We got a call from the bank. All the accounts have been frozen." I looked at my daughter, trying to find a bit of the little girl I had once loved more than life. But all I saw was a strange woman with cold eyes. "I'm protecting the company," I answered. "From the two of you." "Protecting it?" Felicity splashed her hands. "You're destroying everything you've built." "No, you were planning on destroying it, to sell it to Omega Corp, who would shut down production and lay off all the employees." Felicity threw a look at Bryce that read accusation. Apparently, the plans for the sale hadn't been fully coordinated between them. "It was just an idea," Bryce tried to justify himself. One possible scenario. The only scenario you were interested in, I countered. Squeeze out the maximum amount of money and run away, leaving the people who'd spent decades building this company. Felicity moved closer, changing tactics. Her voice became softer, almost pleading. Dad, please, let's talk calmly. This decision, it's too drastic. Think of the company's reputation, the suppliers, the customers. As soon as they find out about the bankruptcy, they already know, Ray intervened. We've sent official notices to all the partners, explaining that this is a temporary protective measure and all contracts will be honored as soon as the procedure is over. And how did they react? Bryce asked defiantly. With understanding, Ray replied. Most of our partners have been working with us for decades. They trust Noah, and they know that he wouldn't make a decision like that without a good reason. I saw Bryce and Felicity exchange glances. They clearly hadn't expected this turn of events, and were now frantically looking for a way out. What about the lawsuit? Bryce finally asked. The one to declare Noah incompetent? It's useless now, Ray explained. The bankruptcy proceedings have priority. Until it was finalized, no other lawsuits affecting the ownership structure or management of the company would be considered. Bryce's face contorted with rage. You're going to regret this, Noah. You have no idea who you're messing with. My own son, in law, who was planning to steal my company, I replied. I think I know exactly who I'm dealing with. Let's go, Felicity. Bryce grabbed his wife's hand. We need to talk to the lawyer. They left, slamming the door loudly. As soon as Ray and I were alone, I felt my strength leaving me. The tension of the last few days, compounded by the effects of the stroke, was taking its toll. I sank heavily into the chair. Are you all right? Ray asked worriedly. I will be, I replied, massaging my temple. I just need to get some rest. Why don't you go home? I can handle it here. I shook my head. No. Right now it's important that everyone sees that I'm in place and in control of the situation. Ray nodded respectfully. Good. I'll go check on the paperwork then. After Ray left, I sat in the silence of the office, looking at the pictures on the walls, the history of Agrotech in snapshots. Here's Ray and I at the first rented space, proud and young. Here is the opening of the new production hall. Here is the awarding of our engineers for an innovative development, and among these photos are a few shots of Felicity, a little girl in the factory holding my hand, a teenager at a company picnic, a university graduate, happy and full of hope. When did it all go wrong? When did my daughter turn into a stranger, willing to betray her own father for money? Could it be my own fault? Working too hard, not paying enough attention to her after Abigail died? Or was it Bryce's greed and ambition that had affected Felicity? The musings were interrupted by the ringing of the phone. It was Tim Fitzgerald. Noah, good news. Judge Mallory has approved the commencement of bankruptcy proceedings. From now on, all company assets are frozen, and any attempt to change the ownership structure or management is blocked until the court rules. That's great, Tim. How soon can a judgment be handed down? In these cases, usually 1 to 3 months. But given that this is a controlled bankruptcy to protect against a hostile takeover, rather than a true financial insolvency, we can expect a quicker resolution. What about Felicity and Bryce's lawsuit to declare me incompetent? As I suspected, it's on hold. Judge Kramer can't make any decisions regarding Agrotech until the bankruptcy is finalized. That was the first good news I'd heard in days. The plan was working. We were buying the time we needed to reorganize the company. Thanks, Tim. Keep me posted. After talking to the lawyer, I felt a little better. At least the threat of an immediate takeover had been averted. Now I needed to focus on the next phase of the plan, reorganizing Agrotech in a way that would protect it from future attempts by Bryce and Felicity. In the evening, when most of the employees had already gone home, my phone began to literally burst with calls and messages. Felicity and Bryce tried to contact me in every way possible. I ignored their calls but looked through the messages. Dad, please, let's talk. You're making a huge mistake. Felicity, Noah, you don't realize what you've done. Cancel the bankruptcy proceedings before it's too late. Bryce, Dad, please answer me. We can work this out as a family. Felicity again. This is a war, Noah. You started it. The last message from Bryce. I showed the messages to Ray. "They're panicking," he remarked. "They didn't expect us to have such a trump card up our sleeve." "Especially Bryce," I added. "For him, it was a done deal. He already saw himself as the owner of the company." "What are you going to do? Answer them?" I shook my head. "No, let them suffer. Maybe now they'd realize they weren't dealing with a helpless old man." In the morning, I found 20 more missed calls and a dozen messages from Felicity and Bryce. The tone of the messages varied from pleading to downright threatening. "Dad, I know you're mad, but let's talk. There's a way to make this right." Felicity: "Noah, you picked the wrong side. I have connections you don't even realize you have. Cancel the bankruptcy or you'll regret it." Bryce: "I showed the new messages to Ray when he arrived at the office." "They don't give up," he remarked. "Especially Bryce. Those threats, they're empty word." I dismissed them. "He's trying to scare me because his plan failed." "You still have to be careful. People like Bryce can be unpredictable when cornered." I agreed with Ray, but decided to continue to ignore their attempts to contact me. Let them realize the seriousness of the situation. In the afternoon, I got a call from Tim. "Noah, we have a problem. Bryce had filed a new lawsuit to declare the bankruptcy proceedings illegal on the grounds that you'd made that decision while incapacitated by the effects of a stroke." I felt a chill go down my spine. "What's his evidence?" "Weak. A medical report from some doctor who didn't even examine you in person." "But Bryce is using his connections. Judge Barrymore, who'll be hearing the case, is known for his conservative views and often sides with relatives in such disputes." "When's the hearing?" Tomorrow. The judge agreed to an emergency hearing because of the urgency of the situation." I could feel my anger rising. Bryce was clearly using his connections to expedite the process. "What do you recommend?" "We need a statement from your doctor that you're fully competent, and you need to attend the hearing in person so the judge can be sure you're competent." "I'll be there. Contact Dr. Sykes, my attending physician. He'll confirm that I'm of sound mind." After talking to Tim, I called Ray and told him about the new turn of events. "They played dirty," Ray remarked, "but that just proves we're on the right track." "I know, but I'm worried about Bryce's connections. If he's able to influence the judge." "We have to be prepared for any outcome," Ray agreed, "but we have the advantage of having the truth on our side." By evening, the tension reached its peak. Felicity came to the office and demanded a meeting with me. I didn't refuse. Perhaps she could provide some useful information about Bryce's plans. When she entered the office, I was startled by her appearance. Usually impeccably dressed and coiffed, she now looked haggard, her eyes red with tears. "Dad," she began without preamble, "you have to cancel the bankruptcy. Bryce has lost his mind. He's threatening to use all his connections to destroy you and the company if you don't give in." "I'm not afraid of his threats," I said calmly, "and I'm not going to cancel the bankruptcy. It's the only way to protect the company." "Protect it from what? Us? We're your family. The family that tried to take my life's work away from me when I was most vulnerable." Felicity lowered her eyes. "I made a mistake. Bryce convinced me it was for your own good, that you needed to rest, to recuperate. Were the plans to sell Omega Corp for my own good?" "I didn't know about those plans," she exclaimed. "I swear, all he talked about was modernization, new approaches. I only found out about the sale yesterday when you told us everything." I looked at my daughter carefully. Something in her voice, in the expression of her eyes, made me think, perhaps she really didn't know about all of Bryce's plans. "Even if she did," I said slowly, "you still betrayed me. You sued me for incompetency, tried to remove me from the company." "I was worried about your health," Felicity tearfully exclaimed. "You've been so weak since your stroke. The doctors said you needed complete rest. And you came back to work almost immediately. Because you felt threatened. And as you can see, for good reason." Felicity came closer. "Dad, please believe me. I made a mistake. But I can see now that Bryce manipulated me. He used my concern for your health for his own purposes." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But after everything that's happened, that trust has been completely shattered. "I'm sorry, Felicity, but I can't take the risk. The bankruptcy proceedings will continue, and then the company will be reorganized." "And what will happen to me?" she asked quietly. "I'm still your daughter." This question was the most painful. Despite the betrayal, Felicity was still my only daughter. My flesh and blood. I don't know, I answered honestly. I can't trust you right now. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I understand, but know that I never meant to hurt you. I really thought I was doing the right thing. After Felicity left, I sat for a long time, thinking about our conversation. Part of me wanted to believe her, to forgive her, but the other part, the more rational part, reminded me that it could just be another tactic. Maybe Bryce had sent her to put my guard down. I decided not to change my plans. The bankruptcy proceedings must continue, and the company must be reorganized in a way that would protect it from any future takeover attempts. The morning began with a phone call. Ray informed me that the court hearing on Bryce's lawsuit to declare the bankruptcy proceedings illegal was scheduled for 10 o'clock. I quickly packed up and left for the office. I had to prepare for the upcoming fight. There was tension at Agrotech. Employees were whispering, silent at my appearance. News of the bankruptcy and family conflict had spread quickly, and now everyone was wondering what would happen to the company and their jobs. Tim Fitzgerald was waiting in my office with a pile of documents. He looked tired but determined. Noah, I've prepared all the necessary paperwork, he said, laying out the documents on the desk. Your doctor's report on your legal capacity, financial statements proving the stability of the company, legal justification for bankruptcy proceedings as a protective measure. Thank you, Tim. What do you think of our chances? Not bad, but I'll tell you, Bryce has some serious connections. Judge Barrymore is known for his conservative views, especially on family business. He might be predisposed to side with the younger generation. I nodded, expecting something like that. What else do we need to know? Bryce will probably emphasize your health, trying to convince the court that the effects of the stroke make you incapable of making informed decisions. We need to be prepared for that. I am. I've been feeling better the last few days. My speech is clearer. My coordination has improved. Tim nodded, but there was worry in his eyes. That's good. But Bryce could pull any number of tricks to provoke you, to provoke an emotional reaction that might confirm what he'd said about your instability. Try to stay calm, no matter what happens. I'll do my best, I promise, though I was seething inside at the thought of my son, in-law and his machinations. After the lawyer left, I gathered the key employees, department heads and old-timers of the company. I had to explain the situation, calm people down, assure them that their jobs were safe. Everyone gathered in the conference room, and I could feel their worried looks on my face. Many of these people had worked at Agrotech for 20 or 30 years. For them, the company was not just a place to work, but a second home. Thank you for coming, I began, trying to speak clearly and confidently. You've all heard about the bankruptcy procedure we've initiated. I want to make it clear, this does not mean that the company is going bankrupt. It is a protective measure, temporary and necessary. I looked around at the faces of those gathered, concerned, tense, but attentive. As you know, after my stroke, my son-in-law Bryce Eldridge tried to take control of the company, first through obtaining power of attorney from me, then through a lawsuit to have me declared incapacitated. When those attempts failed, he began to take more aggressive steps. I paused, gathering my thoughts. I happen to know that Bryce is negotiating with Omega Corp for the sale of Agrotech. You all know that corporations' reputation. They buy companies, squeeze maximum profit out of them, and then shut down production, moving it to countries with cheap labor. I couldn't let that happen. A whisper ran through the room. Many knew of Omega Corp's methods of operation. Some had even been personally affected by their actions when the corporation shut down several businesses in our region. The controlled bankruptcy process gives us time to reorganize the company in a way that protects it from similar threats in the future. Your jobs are safe. All contracts will be honored. Production will continue as usual. What's going to happen to you, Mr. Hutton? Carol Bennett, our chief accountant, asked. We hear Bryce has filed a new lawsuit. Yes, he's trying to challenge the validity of the bankruptcy proceedings. There's a hearing today. I'm confident of a favorable outcome, but regardless of the court's decision, I will do everything I can to protect the company and all of you. I saw some of the employees exchange glances. Not everyone was convinced by my words. Mr. Hutton, said Paul Fisher, the production manager, we appreciate your concern, but we are concerned about the uncertainty. How long will the bankruptcy proceedings last? What happens afterward? The procedure usually takes 1 to 3 months. After its completion, the company will be reorganized. The main changes will affect the ownership structure. A trust fund will be created, which will own a controlling stake. This will protect Agrotech from hostile takeover attempts in the future. For you, for the day-to-day operations of the company, nothing will change. What about your daughter? Janet Price asked cautiously. Is she also involved in this conflict? It was a painful question. I still didn't know how sincere Felicity had been during our last meeting. Did she really not know about Bryce's plans to sell the company? Or was it just an attempt to manipulate me? The situation is complicated, I answered after a short pause. Felicity, she's caught between two fires. I hope that in time we will find common ground, but right now my main concern is to save the company and your jobs. After the meeting, I felt exhausted but satisfied. I think I had managed to reassure key employees that their future was secure. That was important. Without the support of the staff, it would be difficult to stand up to Bryce and his ambitions. Ray came into my office as I was going through the documents Tim had prepared for the court hearing. "How was the meeting?" he asked, taking a seat across from me. "Not bad. People are concerned, but they seem to understand the need for us to act. They fear for their jobs. Naturally, there aren't many jobs in our city, especially for those who have worked in the same company all their lives." I nodded. That was one of the reasons I was so opposed to Bryce's plans. Agrotech wasn't just a business. It provided stability for hundreds of families in Logansport. "We should get to the courthouse," Ray said, glancing at his watch. "Tim's waiting for us there." We left a half hour before the hearing started. Ray was unusually quiet on the way, and I could sense that something was bothering him. "Spit it out," I said at last. "What's bothering you?" Ray sighed. "I got some information about Bryce's financial situation. Turns out he's in serious trouble. Debt, bad investments, maybe even legal trouble." "Where'd you get the information?" "You remember Sam Pollock? My nephew works at his investment firm. Sam heard about our situation and decided to help. Did a little research. It got me thinking. It explained a lot, both Bryce's desperation to gain control of Agrotech and his aggressive methods." "How serious was it?" "Very. According to Sam, Bryce is up to his eyeballs in debt. A few years ago, he invested heavily in a startup that failed miserably. Then he tried to get back in on the risky investments, but it only made things worse. Now the creditors are right on his heels. And he's decided that my company will be his salvation," I concluded grimly. He'll sell Agrotech, pay off his debts, and he doesn't care what happens to his employees and their families." "That sounds about right. Does Felicity know?" Ray shrugged. "It was hard to say. Bryce was clearly trying to hide his true position. Perhaps she really didn't know the extent of his problems or the plans to sell the company." The thought brought me some relief. Perhaps my daughter wasn't as calculating as I thought. Perhaps she really was a victim of Bryce's manipulations. We arrived at the courthouse 15 minutes before the hearing started. Tim was already waiting for us at the entrance, glancing nervously at his watch. "Noah, good thing you're on time," he said, shaking our hands. "Bryce and his lawyer are already here. They seem very confident. They have no real proof of my incapacity," I reminded him. "Just a fabricated report from a doctor who'd never examined me." "Yeah, but they're banking on your appearance and behavior. They'll provoke you, try to throw you off balance. Remember, stay calm, answer clearly and to the point." I nodded, feeling the tension building. Even though I was sure I was right, I couldn't help but worry. Too much was at stake. In the courtroom, we took our seats at the plaintiff's table. Bryce and his attorney, a solid middle-aged man with a hard stare, sat across from us. My brother-in-law didn't even look in my direction, pretending to be completely absorbed in studying some documents. Felicity wasn't in the room, which surprised me. I expected her to come to support her husband, or at least to see how the next round of our fight would end. Judge Barrymore, an elderly man with a stern face and attentive eyes, began the hearing at 10 o'clock sharp. He summarized the case, then gave the floor to Bryce's lawyer. Mr. Howard, the name of my son-in-law's lawyer, began with a lengthy speech about the importance of family values and caring for elderly relatives. He made it sound like Bryce and Felicity were loving children who just wanted to shield me from the stress and worries of running a company. "Your Honor," Howard said, Mr. Hutton suffered a severe stroke that severely affected his cognitive function. Doctors strongly recommended complete rest, but he returned to work almost immediately after leaving the hospital. Moreover, in a state of emotional distress, he made the drastic decision to bankrupt the company, a decision that could have disastrous consequences for the business he had spent a lifetime building. I listened to these lies, feeling anger building up inside. But remembering Tim's advice, I kept my outward composure. Sumakinarm, we have Dr. Randall's medical report, Howard continued, showing me a document. It confirms that the effects of the stroke have rendered Mr. Hutton unable to make informed decisions on important financial and managerial matters. Judge Barrymore studied the document, then looked at me over his glasses. Mr. Hutton, what do you have to say in response to these allegations? I rose slowly, feeling the stares of everyone present. It was important to speak clearly, without hesitation, demonstrating my full capacity. Your Honor, I began, Dr. Randall has never examined me personally. His opinion is based solely on information provided by Mr. Eldridge and has no medical value. I have a report from my attending physician, Dr. Sykes, which confirms that I am fully competent and capable of making decisions. Tim handed the judge the relevant document. Barrymore studied it carefully, then nodded. Continue. The decision to file a controlled bankruptcy was not made spontaneously or in a state of emotional distress. It was a premeditated protective measure that Mr. Fitzgerald, the company's lawyer, and I had devised 2 years ago in case of a hostile takeover attempt. We put that plan into action when we learned that Mr. Eldridge was negotiating the sale of Agrotech to Omega Corp, a corporation known for its practice of shutting down operations after a takeover. Bryce shuddered. Apparently, he hadn't expected me to know about his negotiations with Omega Corp. That's a lie, he exclaimed, jumping up from his seat. I never planned to sell the company. Mr. Eldridge, please remain calm, the judge said sternly. You will have an opportunity to answer. I continued, feeling that I had the first round behind me. A controlled bankruptcy proceeding will not harm the company. It is a temporary measure that protects the assets from any attempt to change the ownership structure or management until the court decides to reorganize. All contracts will be honored, production will continue as usual, and jobs will be preserved. The judge nodded, then turned to Bryce. Mr. Eldridge, your turn. What can you tell me about the negotiations with Omega Corp? Bryce looked annoyed, but quickly pulled himself together. Your Honor, I did meet with Omega Corp, but not to discuss the sale of the company. It was to consult on a production upgrade. Agrotech needs an upgrade, a new approach, and I was looking for an expert opinion. I barely held back a chuckle. Bryce was lying, and not very convincingly. Omega Corp wasn't in the consulting business. It was in the business of taking over companies, squeezing them for maximum profit, and then closing them down. But Mr. Hutton, because of his wealth and conservative views, saw the consulting as a threat. In an emotional outburst, he decided to declare the company bankrupt to prevent me and Felicity from making the necessary changes. It was an irrational decision, dictated not by common sense, but by fear of change and distrust of his own family. Mr. Hutton, the judge turned to me, do you claim to have personally heard Mr. Eldridge talk about the sale of the company? Yes, Your Honor. I overheard him talking to my daughter in the office conference room. He was saying that he was already in preliminary talks with Omega Corp, and that when he finally got control, the company would be his and he could do whatever he wanted with it. That's taken out of context. Bryce shrieked. I was talking about internal changes, about modernization. Mr. Eldridge, last warning, the judge said sternly. If you don't keep order, I will be forced to impose sanctions. Bryce was silent, but his face reddened with anger. I saw his lawyer whisper something to him, urging him to be calm. Mr. Hutton, the judge continued, are there any witnesses to this conversation other than yourself? Yes, Your Honor. My deputy, Raymond Cutler, was with me and heard the whole thing too. Ray, seated behind me, nodded, ready to confirm my words under oath. The judge tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully, then turned to Bryce's attorney. Mr. Howard, do you have any other evidence of Mr. Hutton's incapacity than Dr. Randall's report? Your Honor, Howard began, the mere fact that Mr. Hutton initiated bankruptcy proceedings for a stable, profitable company demonstrates his irrational behavior. This decision is damaging to the reputation of Agrotech and may alienate customers and partners. Mr. Fitzgerald, the judge turned to my lawyer, what do you have to say about this? Tim rose from his seat. Your Honor, a controlled bankruptcy is a legal procedure often used to protect companies from hostile takeovers. We have provided documentation that all of Agrotech's partners and clients have been informed of the temporary nature of the procedure and its protective purposes. Most of them expressed understanding and support. The court hearing continued for another hour or so. Witnesses on both sides were interviewed and documents were reviewed. Bryce and his lawyer tried to portray me as an incapacitated old man clinging to outdated business practices. Tim and I argued for the legality and validity of bankruptcy proceedings as a protective measure. Finally, the judge called a recess for a decision. Ray, Tim, Ray and I went out into the hallway to stretch a bit and discuss the proceedings. I think we did pretty well, Tim said. The judge seemed skeptical of this Dr. Randall's conclusion, and your presentation was convincing. Clear speech, logical arguments. Hard to believe you had a stroke just a few weeks ago. I'm recovering faster than the doctors expected, I replied. I guess being angry gives you extra motivation. Ray grinned, but then his face turned serious. Bryce looks overconfident. Maybe he has some trump card up his sleeve. Like what? I don't know. Maybe he really did use his connections to pressure the judge. We didn't get a chance to expand on that topic before Bryce appeared in the hallway, heading for the exit. Noticing us, he changed his route and approached. His face was tense, but he tried to remain calm. Noah, he began without greeting, I'm offering you one last chance. Call off the bankruptcy proceedings and we'll forget about this conflict. Keep running the company if you want. I won't interfere. His offer sounded too good to be sincere. There was clearly some kind of trap. What's in return? I asked bluntly. Bryce smiled slightly. Nothing in particular. Just make me CFO. Give me the opportunity to use my knowledge and experience to grow the company. That was it. He wanted access to Agrotech's finances to solve his debt problems. I'm sorry, Bryce, but that's not going to happen. I don't trust you, especially after what I've learned about your financial situation. He turned pale. What do you mean? Your debts, your failed investments, your problems with creditors. I know why you want control of Agrotech so badly. You don't see the company as a family legacy, but as a way to solve your financial problems. Bryce clenched his fists, his face contorted with rage. You don't know anything. Yes, I've had some difficulties, but I've got it under control, and I could help Agrotech get to the next level if you weren't such a stubborn old man. Help? By selling Omega Corp and laying off all your employees? That's your idea of help? Sometimes you have to make tough decisions for the greater good. For your own good, you mean, not for the company or the people who work there. Bryce took a step closer, his eyes narrowed. You think you've outplayed me, but you haven't. I have connections you don't even know about, and I'll use them all to get what I want. Is that a threat? It's a promise. He turned and walked briskly toward the exit. Ray and I looked at each other. What was that? Tim asked, who had been watching the scene in silence. A desperate attempt, I answered. He realizes he's losing, and he's grasping at the last straw. Don't underestimate him, Ray cautioned. People in desperate situations can do a lot of things. I nodded, realizing my friend was right. Bryce was cornered by his financial problems, and that made him especially dangerous. Soon we were invited back into the courtroom. Judge Barrymore looked serious and focused. After listening to both sides and reviewing the documents presented, he began, I have reached a decision. Mr. Eldridge's bankruptcy petition is dismissed. Dr. Randall's medical report is not reliable because he did not personally examine Mr. Hutton. The opinion of the treating physician, Dr. Sykes, as well as my personal observation of Mr. Hutton's demeanor in the courtroom, convinces me that he is fully competent. I felt the tension that had been gripping me for the past few hours begin to release. We won this round. The controlled bankruptcy proceeding is recognized as a legitimate and reasonable measure to protect the company from a hostile takeover. It will continue in accordance with the law pending the court's decision on the reorganization. Bryce jumped up from his seat. Your Honor, this is unfair. My father-in-law is acting out of personal animosity, not in the best interests of the company. Mr. Eldridge, the judge said sternly, my decision is final. If you disagree, you have the right to appeal. I now declare this court adjourned. Bryce's trial victory was a turning point. A turning point. Judge Barrymore not only dismissed my son-in-law's lawsuit, but also issued a separate ruling against further attempts to obstruct the bankruptcy proceedings. This unleashed my hands for the next phase of the plan, a complete reorganization of Agrotech's ownership structure. After the meeting, Tim Fitzgerald offered to celebrate the victory, but I declined. I wasn't in the mood to celebrate. It was too bitter to realize that my own daughter had chosen to side with her husband over her father. Plus, I realized Bryce wasn't going to give up so easily. Cornered by financial problems, he could become even more dangerous. Back at the office, I called an emergency meeting with Ray, Tim, and a few other key people I trusted. We were to work out a detailed plan for reorganizing the company. Here's the basic idea, I began, as everyone gathered in the conference room. We are creating a trust that will hold a controlling interest in Agrotech. Several people, including Ray, will manage the trust. This will ensure that the company's principles and values will be upheld even after I'm gone. And the rest of the shares? Paul Fisher, the production manager, asked. You have 75%, Ray has 15%, and the remaining 10% is divided among a few minority shareholders. I'll put 60% into a trust, I replied. The remaining 15 will be distributed among key employees who have been with the company for at least 15 years. You'll all get your share. A surprised whisper ran through the room. No one expected this. Noah, are you sure? Ray asked. It's a very generous decision. I'm sure. You've all earned it with your hard work and dedication, and I want you to have a vested interest in the future of the company. What about Felicity? Carol Bennett asked cautiously. She is your daughter, after all. Wouldn't you be completely disinheriting her? It was a painful question I'd asked myself many times over the past few days. Despite the betrayal, Felicity was my only daughter, my flesh and blood. I'll leave her financial security, I answered after a pause. But not the company's stock. Felicity had proven that she didn't share the values of Agrotech. To her, it's just an asset to sell for more money. I can't risk the future of the company and the hundreds of people who work here. No one objected. Everyone understood that the situation was difficult, and my decision, though tough, was motivated by concern for the company. Tim, I turned to the lawyer, how long will it take to prepare all the necessary documents? To set up the trust fund and reissue the shares? About 2 weeks if you work intensively. But there's one more thing, he paused. Bryce will probably try to challenge this reorganization in court. We need to be prepared for that. What grounds might he have? I asked. He could argue that the reorganization was being done to deprive Felicity of her rightful inheritance, or he could try to play on your health and incapacity again. But Judge Barrymore already declared me legally competent. Yeah, but Bryce can sue in another court, find another judge, or submit new evidence he's clearly not going to give up. I nodded, realizing Tim was right. We needed to act as cautiously as possible to protect ourselves from all possible legal attacks. Good. Prepare the paperwork as thoroughly as possible and have Dr. Sykes do a full examination of my condition so we have an up-to-date medical opinion on my legal capacity. After the meeting, I was alone with Ray. We had a long discussion about the details of the future governance structure of the trust, the principles to be followed, the decision-making mechanisms. It was probably the most important conversation in the history of our company. You will be the CEO, I said. Ashrani for any, but decisions must be made collegially. I want Paul, Carol, Janet, and David on the board. All of them have been with the company for at least 20 years and share our values. A sensible choice, Ray agreed. How would we proceed if Felicity and Bryce tried to interfere? The Foundation's charter would contain clear restrictions. Neither Felicity nor Bryce, nor their descendants will be able to join the board of directors or receive shares in the company. And the Foundation would not be allowed to sell a controlling interest without the unanimous decision of all the managers. Ray nodded, but in his eyes I could see the question he hesitated to ask. Tell me what's bothering you, I urged him. Noah, are you sure you're ready to end things with Felicity completely? She is, after all, your only daughter. and the only direct link to Abigail. I sighed. Ray had asked the exact question that had plagued my sleepless nights. I'm not breaking up the relationship, I said slowly. I'm just protecting the company from her influence. If Felicity wants to re-establish a relationship with me as a father, not as a business owner, my door is always open. But I don't believe that will happen, especially as long as she stays with Bryce. The next day after work, I decided to stop by Felicity's house. I didn't give her any advance warning. I wanted to catch her without Bryce's prepared arguments and manipulations. The house where they lived was in an upscale neighborhood in Logansport, large with a manicured garden and expensive cars in the driveway. Everything screamed a desire to impress, to show status. It was so different from the modest home Felicity had grown up in, from the values Abigail and I had tried to instill in her. To my relief, Bryce's car wasn't in the driveway. That meant I could talk to my daughter alone. Felicity opened the door and froze when she saw me. Several emotions flashed across her face: surprise, wariness, maybe even fear. "Dad, what are you doing here? Can I come in? We need to talk." She hesitated for a second, then stepped back, letting me into the house. "Bryce isn't here," she said as if apologizing. "He's gone to some meeting." "I know. I saw his car was gone, and I'm glad he's gone. I wanted to talk to you without his influence." We walked to the living room, a luxuriously appointed room with designer furniture and expensive paintings on the walls. I sat down in an armchair, Felicity on the couch across from me, nervously rubbing the strap of her watch, a habit from childhood that manifested itself when she was anxious. "I've come to tell you my decision," I began without preamble. "I'm setting up a trust that will own a controlling interest in Agrotech. It will be run by a board of several people, including Ray. You and Bryce will have no access to running the company now or in the future." Felicity turned pale. "You're disinheriting me? Your only daughter?" "Not an inheritance, but the opportunity to destroy what I've spent a lifetime building. I'll set up a trust fund in your name with monthly payments, but control of the company, never." She jumped up, her eyes blazing with anger. "You can't do that. It's not fair. I'm your daughter, your blood. How can you give the company to strangers instead of me?" "Strangers?" I shook my head. "Ray, Paul, Carol, Janet, David. They've dedicated decades of their lives to Agrotech. They share the company's values, care about the people who work there. They are closer to me than you and Bryce and your plans to sell the business and lay everyone off." "I told you I didn't know about the plans to sell," she exclaimed. "Bryce didn't fill me in on all the details." "And that's even worse," I replied sharply. "You were willing to take the company away from me without even asking what your husband was planning to do with it. That shows how indifferent you are to Agrotech and the people who work there." Felicity sank back down onto the couch, her anger suddenly replaced by fatigue. "You always loved the company more than you loved me," she said quietly. "Always put her first. Even when Mom was sick, you spent more time at the office than with her." Those words hit me like a slap in the face. Is that really how she saw the situation? I'd worked so hard to provide the best treatment for Abigail, to pay for experimental methods, specialists, not out of love for the company, but out of love for my wife. "You're wrong," I replied. "I worked to provide the best treatment for your mother, and for your future too." "My future?" She grinned bitterly. "And now you're robbing me of that future by taking away my company." "I'm not taking it away. I'm protecting it from Bryce and his financial ventures, from his debts and his creditors." Felicity flinched. "How do you know about his debts?" "I have my sources. I know that he invested heavily in a failed startup and then tried to get back on track with risky investments. I know that creditors are demanding repayment, threatening to sue, and I know that he saw Agrotech as a lifeline, to sell the company, pay off his debts, and start from scratch, not caring that hundreds of people would lose their jobs in the process." My daughter lowered her head. She didn't seem to know all the details, but she suspected something like this. "What am I supposed to do now?" she asked quietly. "Bryce will be furious when he finds out about the trust fund. It's your choice, Felicity. You can stay with him and continue to support him against me, or you can rethink your life, your values." "Are you suggesting I leave my husband?" I'm suggesting you make a choice based not on greed and ambition, but on what really matters. Honesty, caring for others, responsibility. Felicity was silent for a long time, staring into the space in front of her. I saw contradictory feelings struggling in her eyes. I don't know what to do, she finally said. It's all too confusing. Bryce convinced me that we were acting in your best interest, that you needed a rest after your stroke. And now I find out that he was planning to sell the company, that he's in debt. Think about it calmly, I said, getting up. My door's always open to you as a daughter, but not as someone who wants control of Agrotech. As I left, I turned around in the doorway. Felicity sat motionless, staring into the space in front of her. Her face was pale and tense. I felt a pang of regret. Perhaps I had been too harsh, but I couldn't back down. Too much was at stake. The next 2 weeks passed in intense work. Tim Fitzgerald and his legal team were preparing the documents for the trust fund. Ray met with potential trustees, discussed the principles of operation and decision-making mechanisms. I was undergoing a medical examination by Dr. Sykes to get a fresh opinion on my capacity. Bryce, as we expected, didn't give up after losing in court. He filed a new lawsuit, now seeking a declaration that the very process of setting up the trust fund was illegal. But this time the judge quickly dismissed his claims, citing Judge Barrymore's previous ruling that I had full legal capacity. I hadn't heard from Felicity. I tried to call her several times, but she didn't answer. It bothered me. It wasn't my plan to completely sever my relationship with my daughter, but I realized that she needed time to process everything that had happened and make her own choices. Finally, the day came when all the paperwork was ready and signed. The Hutton Heritage Trust officially became the owner of 60% of Agrotech. Another 15% was distributed to key employees. I kept a token 1% for myself, enough to remain a shareholder, but not enough to control the company. The board of directors was chaired by Ray and included Paul Fisher, Carol Bennett, Janet Price, and David Horn, people I trusted completely and who shared my vision for the future of the company. The foundation's charter clearly spelled out key principles. The company must remain true to its tradition of quality and employee care. Manufacturing must remain in Logansport, bringing jobs to the local community, and the sale of a controlling interest could only be accomplished by unanimous vote of all managers, and only to a company that shared the same values. Neither Felicity, Bryce, nor their descendants could serve on the board of governors or receive shares in the company. These restrictions were legally fixed and could not be changed. The day the documents were signed, Ray and I decided to celebrate with a modest dinner at Lorenzo's, the same restaurant that Abigail and I had frequented. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Satisfaction at having protected the company and the people who worked there, bitterness at finally breaking up with my daughter, and fatigue from all the fighting. To the future of Agrotech, Ray toasted, raising his glass. To the future, I echoed. We talked about plans, about new projects, about how the company would develop further. Ray was full of enthusiasm and ideas. I listened to him and realized that I had made the right choice. Agrotech would be in good hands. Tarla, what are you going to do now? Ray asked me when we were finishing dinner. Are you going to retire? Will you travel? I wondered. It was a question I'd been asking myself for the last few days. After the company was secured, what next? What to devote the remaining years of my life to? I don't know, I answered honestly. I don't plan to leave completely. I will advise the board of managers and share my experience. But yes, maybe some traveling. Abigail has always wanted to see Europe, but we never got around to it. Maybe I'll do it for both of us. And Felicity, will you try to repair the relationship? I sighed. Of course I will. She is, after all, my daughter, my blood. But I don't know if she'll want to, especially after I took away her control of the company. Give her time, Ray advised. Maybe she'll realize that you didn't act out of revenge or resentment, but out of concern for the company and the people? Maybe, I nodded, though deep down I doubted it. After dinner, Ray offered me a ride home, but I declined. I wanted to walk, to get some fresh air, to reflect on everything that had happened in the last few weeks. As I passed the city park, I saw a familiar figure on a bench by the lake. Felicity was sitting alone, staring out at the water. Even from the back, I could see that she was upset. Her shoulders slumped, her head bowed. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to approach. "May I sit down?" I asked, stopping beside her. Felicity raised her head. Her eyes were red with tears. "Dad? What are you doing here?" "Walking. And you?" "Just sitting, thinking." I sat down next to him, keeping a little distance. We were silent for a while, staring at the calm surface of the lake. "I signed all the papers today," I said finally. "The trust fund has been set up. 60% of the shares of Agrotech now belong to it." Felicity nodded without looking at me. "I know. Bryce found out this morning from his lawyer. He didn't take it very well. I can imagine." Silence again. I didn't rush her, knowing she needed time to formulate her thoughts. "We broke up," she said finally. "I left Bryce. It was sudden." I stared at my daughter, not knowing what to say. "After we talked, I started to notice things I'd ignored before," Felicity continued. "His obsession with money, his manipulation. He never really loved me. I was just his connection to Agrotech, and I let myself be used because I was flattered by his attention, his image of a successful financier." "You made a difficult decision," I said. "But I think it's the right one." "I'm still mad at you for taking my company away from me," she admitted. "But I'm starting to understand why you did it." Bryce was really planning to sell Agrotech at the first opportunity. He admitted it to me during our last fight, said the company was just an asset to be used to its best advantage. I nodded, not feeling any satisfaction at being right. "I don't know if we can ever fully repair our relationship," Felicity said. "Too much has happened. Too many words have been said. But I'm willing to try, if you're ready." I looked at my daughter, at her tired face, at her hands still rubbing the strap of her watch. Despite everything that had happened, she was still my child, my flesh and blood. "I'm willing to try," I said. "Not as business partners, but as father and daughter. Just people trying to understand each other." We sat by the lake until sunset, talking about everything and nothing in particular. Not about the company, not about money, not about the future, just about life, about memories, about the little moments that make up the essence of human relationships. I didn't know if we could ever fully rebuild the trust and intimacy that had been destroyed by this conflict. Probably not. Some things can't be brought back. But maybe we can build something new. A more honest, more mature relationship based on mutual respect and understanding. And Agrotech will live its life, protected from greed and ambition, true to its principles and values. My life's work will remain in the capable hands of people who truly care about the company and its future. The stroke changed my life, but not in the way I feared. It didn't render me helpless. It didn't take my company away from me. It didn't rob me of purpose and meaning. On the contrary, he forced me to face the harsh truth about my family and make difficult but necessary decisions. I didn't know how long I had left. Months, years, decades. But I was sure of one thing. Whatever happened next, I would face it with the same stubbornness and determination with which I had built the company from the ground up and protected it from those who wanted to destroy it. Even if it was my own daughter and son-in-law.